Welcome back. This video is going to be about forgiveness, unforgiveness, and how holding someone to bitterness may cause us to do to someone else the very thing that victimized us. So this is something that God has been unfolding to me in terms of releasing compassion in my own heart for, sometimes when someone, I believe that nobody ever really intentionally wanted to hurt someone else's life. When things bad have happened to us, and I know the source of that ultimately was the devil's kingdom, because he comes to steal, kill, and destroy our battles, not against flesh and blood. But still, there was a person that was worked through. And when it caused a lot of damage, God has to do a work of forgiveness in our heart. Jesus says, forgive from your heart. And sometimes we're like, but God, they owe me. It wasn't right. And God knows how to work the restoration, even if it's from that person, but it has to first come from the heart, from me being restored in forgiveness. Here's what he showed me today in releasing levels of compassion. So, if someone has been really abused in a marriage by a devil through a woman, and they really haven't allowed God to heal them at the deep levels of their heart, they might end up doing, because deep down they have a hatred of women, because they have a hatred still that's not healed against their ex-wife or their wife, then they may end up doing the exact ways that they're binding their wife in unforgiveness, or their ex-wife, whatever. That exact way that that spirit in her victimized them, they actually are bound to that devil, and they might end up releasing that and doing that exact thing to someone else, because that devil is binding them, and now that devil is going to come in and abuse this other woman in the same way that man was abused by that spirit. And that man might not have any desire to abuse that other woman, but his wife didn't have any desire to abuse him, but it really, really hurt his heart and messed up his life. And so, but now that same spirit has gone in and done the exact same thing to this woman that had nothing to do with any of this. And life can be a mess, such a mess. And the truth is, devils are always behind the mess, but we get caught up in it. And it's sad, because I'm sure that woman, right, if this was a real scenario, that woman really deep down, she never wanted to be a bad wife and mess up her husband's life and mess up the family. And that man deep down never wanted to go into bitterness, didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand that was then opening his eyes up to maybe adultery. And now that spirit of adultery is causing him to be over here, then that messing up the marriage even more. Everything's super messed up. And now this other woman who's innocent and now she gets abused and she gets stolen from, and that devil rips off her life even more. And in the end, how God, what does forgiveness look like? Where we forgive, and then how do we let you actually restore our lives? Because there's a way that God is the one that restores. I think about the element of Zacchaeus and how he restored 4 times what was stolen. It's interesting. If you look at the law, there were things in the law sometimes if you study the word restore. I did a word study on this a couple years ago, and God brought this back to me today. I was like, that's interesting, because it wasn't a random number when he restored 4 times. That actually was a fulfillment of the law. Sometimes there was a 4 times that was required to restore back the losses. Sometimes it was 2 times. In the case of adultery, it was a 7-fold. That's big. 7-fold is a big number. That's not times, that's a 7-fold. And some things we actually can't restore fully at the moment what was lost. And maybe God moves to restore things in different ways at different times. Maybe he moves on someone's heart, but it has to come from a heart that is free, that is healed. When that happened to Zacchaeus, it wasn't because he was so tormented by bitterness and guilt. It was because he had been forgiven. And God does say, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And I'm asking him more of what that means, because the truth is, when God touches someone's life and they're moved to bring restoration, it is out of a place of, I believe it's really out of a place of freedom and healing. And so that they just want to see someone's life restored. And maybe they're not able to even give fully what they want to give. Like they realize the damage is so great that they could never pay it back. And God knows that. And God might move on that person in a place of healing and out of love, say, because that person is like, I don't even have enough. Like the damage was so great. Like I don't even have enough to make this right. And God knows that. And God might move on that person, and they might in their heart, because God never forces us to do anything. God's not going to be like, the devil will come and be like, you better do this, you better do that. And that bitterness and that guilt might come and do that. But when God moves on someone, it comes from a place of like, that person is either like moved with compassion or moved with freedom. And they're like, I just want to see restoration. And God can work with that person and have specifics of like what that's going to look like at that moment. And then there might be more later. But see, we don't write that story. God writes that, but it comes from a heart of mercy and love and forgiveness and freedom. God is never a God of control. It's like, don't do this, or you better do this. And then it's all like this manipulation and control, or like, if they do this, then you do that. It has to come from a place of like, that person owes me nothing. And so freedom and forgiveness says, I just want to love. Like I just want to give. I just want to make something right. I can't even make it fully right. I am aware that this amount of money can never ever repay back what has been stolen from this person. But I want to give. I want to do something. And only God can like write that story. But the other thing that's important, like if you've been on the abused end of something, to realize that to release that person to the love of God and the forgiveness that says, I'm not going to require that person to do anything. The truth is, they could never restore back what the devil has done. And I know it was the devil. And so I am asking you as my Father to help me in my heart forgive this person completely, that they know that they're forgiven and that they don't have to do anything, and that I don't want anything, or that, the person that's been abused, whatever, I don't want anything if it's out of guilt or bitterness. But God says, freely you've received, freely give. There's a freedom, and there is an exchange. One of the things that God's been talking to me about is the exchange when we give out of a freedom. When we give out of a wrong spirit, all that stuff actually can be stolen back from the devil, because that manipulation will come in the back door and rip that all apart, because it was a wrong spirit to begin with. But see, God's been showing me, what happens when we give everything to him, and we give and we give and we give. And I'm going to do a different video on that. This one is almost done, but all of this to say is we don't always know why we do the things that we do, and we didn't really mean to mess things up, and God knows that. Sometimes what's really wrong is that there's a deep offense and wound that has never really been healed from someone that is similar. Maybe it's a similar type of relationship or a similar gender. And if we don't let God heal that, then that spirit has a right in our lives to then abuse that same relationship in someone else, a woman. If it was a woman here, then it's a woman. And that same spirit that abused us, then it has a right, because of our bitterness, that spirit is bound to us, then can do that same victimization because of the hatred in our own hearts to that female or that man, then is going to come and abuse in the same way over here. And we never meant that for that to happen. And God's saying, look, I want to forgive you for this. If you want to restore any of that is absolutely up to you and freedom in you at any level, at any way, at any time. I'm not requiring that of you. But I might ask you to do some things, but let's look at this. Let's look at this healing of this real deep wound that's here, because this other thing over here was never healed. And until this is healed, I am not going to be able to restore you at that type of relationship until we do some deep healing in your own heart. Because I know that your heart is, as a man, as a woman, that you don't want to abuse another marriage or another relationship in the ways that you were abused. So we need to do some healing and forgiveness and healing in the heart so that these things are cut off and those ties from those spirits are cut off from that. The abuse that happened, this is why the abuse is perpetuated. That's why hurt people hurt other people. And so when we let God heal those hurts and those wounds, we're no longer bound to those spirits that abused us to then allow those spirits to then abuse someone else. And so, because how bad is that? Like, if we then become the abuser in the same way that we were abused, like, how nasty is the devil? And then then allow God to heal and minister to our hearts, but then let him lead our hearts also in bringing restoration if we have a heart for that. We know he has a heart for that. For Zacchaeus, when the presence of God touched him, it touched Zacchaeus. He had the ability to restore back fully what the law required, right? But he probably wasn't even thinking about that. Like, I'm going to do exactly what the law, but the Spirit of God, will fulfill the law from the heart. And so, but sometimes we're not able to fulfill that, and God will meet us in our hearts for because our hearts are wanting to restore back. And God just loves us. He just wants to heal everybody's hearts. He just wants to free us from bitterness. He wants to free us from the bondage to the devil. Bitterness binds us to the sins. It binds the other person to sin. It binds us to that same sin. So then we become an abuser. It binds things all messed up. And God he just wants us to be free. He wants us to be free. He wants us to release that other person so they can be free. He wants us to not be tormented. He wants others to not be tormented by our own bitternesses. So he just wants to free humanity from the abuse and the victimization of devils and stuff. And I think that's all that I'm going to say. We're at 14 minutes. I, as a sister, if anyone watches this in the future, because God's dealing with me in deep levels on this, I just cry freedom. I cry restoration. I cry forgiveness, that God would minister deeply in our hearts, that we forgive from the heart, no matter what it's been, no matter what the abuse, no matter what the loss is. And then when the freedom and the healing happens, that God will lead for how restoration looks, from a place of love, from a place of freedom, not from a place of torment. I bless you, God blesses you, and God loves you with an everlasting love from his heart. Have a great day.